Andreas, welcome back to TVP World. Thank you, as always, for taking the time.
Thanks for having me again.
OK, so what's your assessment? You just heard our correspondent in Ukraine saying that basically the feeling on the ground is that this is a feint designed to test Ukrainian defences and hopefully move Ukrainian forces away from other areas, for example, around Donetsk. Would you agree with that assessment?
We will see. It's difficult to assess what the overall strategy here is. Kharkiv is, of course, in a very difficult situation because it is a big city, Ukraine's biggest city, a former capital of Soviet Ukraine, which is very close to the Russian border. And in that connection, this whole discussion about whether Ukraine can use weaponry, Western weaponry, also on legitimate Russian state territory has a special salience. Maybe this is an operation to actually capture or at least destroy Kharkiv. Maybe it is indeed a diversion from another operation or other operations further down south.
Right, so we don't know yet. We'll just have to watch and see. Now, if we zoom out a little bit, Andreas, how would you assess Russia's progress over the last few weeks? I mean, Ukraine has actually cut back on its use of munitions due to shortages. And, of course, the Russians have taken advantage of that as much as possible with greater airstrikes and so on. Have the Russians made any strategic gains in this window of opportunity that they've had?
As far as I know, for now, not. There was a couple of days ago some concern about a seeming breakthrough at one of the frontline places, but this seems to have not translated into a major breakthrough for Russia. And so far, what Russia can only be proud of is basically conquering a few more villages in eastern Ukraine. And it is, in fact, given that Ukraine is now experiencing this shortage of ammunition, surprising how well Ukraine is holding the front line, basically intact, giving away some territory, but overall only very, very little territory. If you look at the whole map of Ukraine, it's a very small percentage point that Ukraine has recently had to give up because it does not have enough ammunition.
Understood. Now, there are two aspects to Ukraine's challenges. One, of course, as you say, are the munitions and the weaponry, and the second is the manpower. Rotation is limited, and the people on the front are exhausted. The soldiers are exhausted at the moment. How are both of these progressing? So when do we expect them to get the munitions that have been promised by America and other countries? And how are they doing on the manpower front?
Right now, it looks as if the strategically, at least, the question of weaponry is better solved than the issue of manpower. My assessment from watching what is happening in Ukraine is that concerning manpower and getting soldiers into the army and to the front line is basically that so far the circumstances under which the Ukrainian men, it's mainly men who are, of course, on the front line, but not only men, also some women are doing that, are not, these circumstances are not that good. The structure of the mobilization is problematic. It is not a well thought through process often, and also the overall financial package for frontline service is not that attractive currently. In that connection, I think what becomes important is this discussion about the confiscated Russian money that is in the West. If that could be transferred to Ukraine, then Ukraine could improve the financial package for the frontline soldiers, and then there would be many who would perhaps decide to go actually to the front line and to get, at least for their families, a good amount of money. This is, in my assessment, currently perhaps the main issue.
Understood, but as we have seen from the beginning of this full-scale invasion, Andreas, the world has actually been dragging its feet. And Ukraine has been stuck in this kind of limbo almost, where they're given just enough to hold the ground, but not enough to win or to take back occupied territories. It sounds as though it's going to be a similar thing with the frozen Russian assets. Would you agree?
Yes, it doesn't look good because these assets are already frozen for more than 2 years, and basically the arguments that are sort of brought forward against the confiscation, they are in a way devalued already by this long-time freeze of this money. So one of the arguments is that this would then be a problem for, let's say, the European Union as a financial market if this money is confiscated. But now it's in any way already for more than 2 years not usable by Russia, and there were no major repercussions from this freeze of the money. So the money is there. It's lying there. It's dead money, you could argue, and it could be made of use for Ukraine, because I think this money will not go back to Russia anyway. I think nobody expects that to happen. Originally, the plan was to confiscate this money at some point for the rebuilding of Ukraine, for reparation payments. But currently, Russia is destroying Ukraine with every additional day of the war, and it would make much more sense to invest this money into the Ukrainian army, so that the Russian army can be fought back, and then not that much will have to be rebuilt again.
Right, or at least limit the amount of damage that's being caused. Now, a couple of countries in the last week or so have come to the fore with what I suppose are quite courageous steps. The first, of course, Britain saying that its weaponry can be used by Ukraine to attack targets inside Russia. And the second being President Macron saying that the question of French boots on the ground in Ukraine is not out of the question. How have both of those been taken in Ukraine? And what do you see the outcome of these statements? Will this happen?
Well, both of these statements have been, of course, very welcome in Ukraine. The question is now whether they will be actually implemented, and whether this will actually then indeed lead to a use of, let's say, British weaponry on Russia's territory, and whether indeed there may be at some point perhaps a coalition of the willing. I don't think it will be the EU or NATO as organizations, but perhaps a coalition of the willing under the leadership of France that will send troops to Ukraine, maybe not to the front line, but rather to the rear. So this is something very much expected, and I think it's also these are also good signals if these signals do not just remain signals, but will also have practical circumstances. These are also useful steps vis-à-vis Moscow, because Moscow has been, over the last 30 years, an invader and an aggressor, but it has been also a risk-averse invader and risk-averse aggressor. And these prospects by France and Britain, they sort of make the war unpredictable for Moscow, and I think that's very good. This will make people in Moscow rethink this whole adventure.
Yes, well, one hopes so, certainly. I mean, they're still saber-rattling, as they have, and threatening nuclear Armageddon. But do you think that they will actually proceed if there were, for example, a coalition of the willing, as you say, supporting the Ukrainian military? Would you think there will be, we will see tactical nuclear weapons on the ground being fired by Russia into Ukraine?
Frankly, I don't think this will happen, because this will be a break of everything that the post-war order was built. Of course, the US has already in 1945 used nuclear bombs against Japan, but that was against the background that Japan had attacked the US in 1941, and it was part of this larger fascist coalition. And since then, we have not seen anything like that. It's also a very strategically very ambivalent, would be a very ambivalent step for Moscow, because both the EU and the US have indicated that they would then become much more forward-leaning, to put it in the most cautious terms, in terms of supporting Ukraine. There have been made actually indications that then actually the West would respond to such a use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine with non-nuclear weapons, with conventional weapons, but it could, for instance, destroy then the Russian troops on Ukrainian soil. So as odd as it sounds, if Russia would use a tactical nuclear weapon on Ukraine, this could actually be to the advantage at the end of the things of Ukraine. Also, China has made signals that it would not like this to happen. The background here being, I think, that China is fearing that countries around China would then acquire nuclear weapons. The whole non-proliferation regime would be then perhaps a thing of the past. So there are lots of forces all over the world, I think, that are against this, and the price would be very high for the Kremlin. That's why I think this is saber rattling. Mainly, it's a psychological warfare. It's not really escalation.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, Andreas, unfortunately, we have to end there. But thank you very much for coming along and sharing your analysis with our audience. Have a good evening, sir.
You too. Thank you.